the date was set. June 30th, an unofficial deadline. For thousands, it became a countdown to fear. Across South Africa, tensions have reached a boiling point. Anti-immigrant vigilante groups, most notably March and March, issued an ultimatum. All undocumented foreign nationals must leave. This isn't just rhetoric, it's a movement. Groups like March and Operation Doodle have mobilized thousands, staging over 120 marches nationwide. In cities like Johannesburg and Durban, the atmosphere is suffocating. Businesses have shuttered. Streets are empty. The threat of violence hangs heavy in the air. The movement claims to target only the undocumented, but on the ground, the reality is far more chaotic. Legal residents report being targeted, harassed, and forced to prove their status on the street. This has sparked a massive exodus. Over 25,000 foreign nationals have already fled. Neighboring countries like Malawi, Zimbabwe, and Nigeria are now running emergency evacuation flights. The government is caught in the middle. President Cyril Ramaphosa has rejected the vigilante ultimatums, insisting that immigration enforcement is the state's sole responsibility. But the state's authority is being tested. With police resources stretched thin, these citizen-led inspections continue to spread, turning neighborhoods into flashpoints. It's a dangerous cycle. Unemployment, economic pain, and failing infrastructure have created a vacuum. And in that vacuum, xenophobic sentiment is finding fertile ground. Is this self-preservation or a betrayal of the Pan-African solidarity that defined the post-apartheid era? The answer is tearing the country apart. As the marches continue, the question remains, can the state regain control, or has the path toward a continental solution already been lost? This is the reality on the ground today, a nation at a crossroads. But why now? To understand the current unrest, you have to look at the math. 43% unemployment. That is the figure that defines the modern South African struggle. In townships where jobs are scarce, the narrative of stolen opportunity has become a powerful, if often inaccurate, rallying cry. Critics argue that migrants are straining public infrastructure. They point to overcrowded clinics and schools, blaming foreign nationals for systemic underinvestment. But economists tell a different story. Research shows that migrants often fill labor gaps in sectors locals avoid, and they are net contributors to the tax base. The disconnect between the data and the public perception is not accidental. It is being cultivated. Political parties, facing declining support, have found that stoking anti-migrant sentiment is a quick, effective way to secure votes. By framing the migrant as the enemy, leaders deflect attention from their own failures to provide basic services or create sustainable economic growth. It is a classic political tactic. Find a vulnerable group, blame them for the systemic problems, and watch the public anger shift away from the halls of power. The reality is that the economy is not a zero-sum game. But when people are struggling to put food on the table, nuance is the first casualty. This manipulation of fear has turned neighbors against neighbors, creating a climate where violence is not just possible, it's expected. As political parties gear up for the next cycle, the rhetoric is only expected to sharpen. The migrant is no longer just a person, they are a campaign tool. The question is no longer just about immigration policy. It is about the soul of the nation and who gets to be part of the future. In the face of mounting pressure, the state has finally unveiled a 5-point migration management plan. The strategy aims to digitize border records and streamline asylum processing, but implementation is proving to be a massive hurdle. The administration is walking a razor's edge. They must enforce the law to appease a frustrated public, while simultaneously upholding constitutional human rights. The judiciary has stepped in. High court rulings have explicitly banned vigilante document checks, declaring them a violation of personal liberty. Yet, enforcing this on the ground is difficult. In remote border regions, the state's reach is limited, and porous boundaries remain a constant challenge. Resources are stretched to the limit. Border guards are tasked with monitoring hundreds of kilometers of terrain with minimal equipment. This resource gap is precisely what local vigilante groups exploit. They claim to be filling a void the state has abandoned. It creates a dangerous parallel power structure. When citizens start taking the law into their own hands, the state's monopoly on force begins to crumble. The government is now under fire from all sides. Critics argue they are too soft on illegal migration, while human rights groups say they are failing to protect the vulnerable. It is a diplomatic nightmare. Tensions are rising with neighboring SADC nations who are demanding their citizens be treated with dignity. The state's response is fragile. It is a balancing act that is rapidly running out of time. Beyond the political noise, the human cost is mounting. Thousands are abandoning lives built over decades, leaving behind homes, businesses, and futures. Deportations have accelerated. For many, voluntary repatriation is the only safe option left, a choice made under the duress of constant threats. This exodus is not happening in a vacuum. It is creating a diplomatic firestorm across the continent. Governments in Lilongwe, Abuja, and Accra are demanding answers. They view the treatment of their citizens as a direct affront to African unity. The friction is palpable. Nigeria and Ghana have issued formal protests, warning that the current trajectory threatens long-standing trade and cultural partnerships. Legal residents are also caught in the crossfire. Many have lived in South Africa for years, contributing to the economy, only to find their status suddenly questioned. The fear now is of retaliation. South African businesses operating across the continent are bracing for potential backlash. From retail chains to telecommunications, South African brands are deeply embedded in regional markets. A boycott could be devastating. The economic ripple effects are already being felt. Investors are watching closely, and the risk premium on regional partnerships is climbing. This is a crisis that transcends borders. It is a test of regional diplomacy and the resilience of the African economic community. As families pack and businesses worry, the true cost of this exodus remains to be seen. The road ahead is uncertain, and the bridges being burned today may take a generation to rebuild. Amidst the chaos, the presidency is pushing back. They are actively countering the narrative that South Africa is becoming a pariah state. Behind closed doors, diplomatic channels remain open. Officials are engaged in intense, ongoing negotiations with leaders across the continent. The government's core argument is clear. Migration is not just a South African issue. It is a shared continental challenge. But this message is being drowned out. Misinformation campaigns, fueled by social media, are spreading faster than official policy can be explained. These campaigns are weaponized to create panic. They target specific demographics, amplifying grievances to destabilize regional political cohesion. South Africa maintains that the solution isn't isolation. They argue for a unified African approach to border management and economic development. Yet, the gap between policy and reality remains wide. For the average citizen, the rhetoric of regional cooperation feels distant. The government's challenge is to bridge this gap. They must convince a skeptical public that continental stability is in their own interest. It is a difficult sell. When economic survival is at stake, the long-term benefits of regional integration are easily ignored. The presidency remains optimistic. They believe that with time and better communication, the myth of isolation will fade. But for now, the battle for public opinion is far from over. The future of South Africa's regional standing hangs in the balance. To move beyond the current crisis, the ANC has proposed a bold new path: the Continental Compact on migration. The goal is to shift from fragmented, reactive national policies to a single, binding African Union framework. A binding framework would harmonize labor laws, streamline documentation, and create shared responsibility for border security. But the architects of this plan know that border management is only a symptom. The real work lies in addressing the root causes: systemic governance failures, regional conflict, and extreme economic disparity. Without addressing these, any migration policy is just a temporary fix for a much larger problem. The proposed compact emphasizes investment in regional economic zones to create opportunities where people currently feel forced to leave. But achieving this requires political will that has historically been lacking across the continent. South Africa is positioning itself as the leader in this transition, but its own internal struggles make that position precarious. Can a unified African approach truly manage the complex reality of migration? The Continental Compact is a vision. Now it must become a reality. The stakes have never been higher for the continent. If history has taught us anything, it is that walls do not solve migration. Enforcement-only strategies are a temporary bandage on a systemic wound. The path forward requires a painful but necessary transition, moving away from xenophobic scapegoating toward genuine regional cooperation. Border fortification is a distraction. The real solution is long-term economic integration that lifts the entire region. South Africa cannot thrive in a vacuum. Its stability is inextricably linked to the prosperity of its neighbors. When the region prospers, South Africa prospers. When the region suffers, South Africa pays the price. The choice is clear. We either build bridges that foster growth or fences that ensure mutual decline. The era of nationalistic isolation must end if the continent is to realize its potential. It is time to replace fear with policy. and reactionary anger with long-term vision. This is the regional imperative that will define the next decade of South African life. The question is no longer whether we can afford to integrate, but whether we can afford not to. The future is not in keeping people out, but in building a continent where people can thrive. This is the only way forward for South Africa and its neighbors. The verdict is clear. Regional cooperation is not a choice, it is an absolute necessity. Thank you for watching this investigation into the future of Southern Africa. This has been a report on the regional imperative